And of course, Mbuyiselo, let me see if I can get that right. Mbuyiselo Botha from Sonke Gender Justice. Mbuyiselo, good morning to you.
Thank you so much, Elvis.
Gentlemen, let's look at this issue, and let's start off with you, Mbuyiselo. As Sonke Justice, what help do you offer to these victims?
Well, then referral, one, but two, there's also, we do more preventative work, working with men, but also working with organizations that work with women, your POA, your, various ones that focuses on working with women. So that's when Elvis, our prime focus is to work with men so that we could be prevented, the violence, the rape, HIV. That's mainly our focus. Yeah.
And why is it that we see an increase in Mthetho in these type of cases in our country?
Well, I mean, South Africa is a very violent country to start off with, and we have a very violent past wherein it seems that it's quite easier for us as South Africans to resolve conflict through violent means. Whether you look at, service delivery protests where people would be wanting a clinic, but they will burn a school, and then they'll be violent in the process. And I think part of what Mbuyiselo's work in their organization seeks to do is to actually say to men, there are different ways and better ways of handling conflict rather than using violence. And I think what we are seeing now, we're seeing a lot more of these cases getting high profile and being reported, but actually there's a lot more that are not being reported. So for me, the good thing is that when the media reports on these cases, it gives us a glimpse of what is actually not being reported, because most of these cases, they happen in private spaces, in domestic spaces, and we all know, a lot of people would say, we don't want to get involved because it's a private matter. In fact, we are a very violent country.
Mbuyiselo, is there more that can be done to assist and help these troubled men in our society?
I think there's more, Elvis. One of the things that, and we have not done sufficiently as a country, is a focused attention on working with men. And by that I mean when Elvis, so that we do not always close the stable when the horse has bolted. What has happened is that we are more of a reactive, more of a firefighting, if you like. So I think, where anger management, where we really even encourage men, people like Mthetho to say, but there are services out there. If I am not able to deal with my anger, if I'm not able to when Elvis to say that I will walk away, if I'm not able to resolve what may be a difficult situation in one's life as a man, but also to say that but there are other alternative means, and we have not been able as a society to act on a very widespread, In one of your introductory clips, you spoke about how we focus on 16 days, on the Women's Month, on the Mother's Day, and these are important interventions. But you see, when Elvis, we haven't as a country really said, we will devise programs such as your One Man Can, your Brothers for Life, your Fatherhood, that are long-term, so that we are not a society that, we more reactive. When these things happen, or we wait for an invoicing to get killed, we wait for Masabata, we wait for, all of this high profile, and then we stand up. When in fact, when these things happen, we should have been saying that, but we are doing a lot of work.
This anger, Mthetho, that we see in our society in men, is it mental, emotional, psychological?
Well, it's a combination of factors, actually, and I think every situation differs, but I think there's one fundamental thing about men generally across the globe, and that is our masculinity, unfortunately, seems to be so linked to being violent. In other words, you find a situation where in order to be a man, you automatically inherit, if I were to use that, power, and usually that power is in relation to women, where women are seen to be of lesser value. And unfortunately, if you think in terms of relationships specifically, even when we relate with women as our partners, we don't see them as individual partners who have a right to be outside us. We see them as an extension of our property, as you were. And this is quite a historic thing. And some of us, we still have that narrative to define who we are nowadays. Even if you think about sex relations, Mbuyiselo was talking earlier about HIV risks for women being higher, and stats shows us women are more at risk of being infected than men are. And part of the problem is that they would struggle to negotiate condom use, and part of the issue is that men have the power functionally, And unfortunately, even sex is seen to be an extension of satisfying our needs rather than women being sexual beings. So there's a lot that we need to change about who we are as men, where we create new narratives where I'm a man, but it does not mean I must subjugate women. So as Mbuyiselo was saying, if you think about doing an RDP of the soul of South Africa, that's what we've got to do, because some of these cases that you see, you have a situation where people love each other, but they are violent towards each other. And sometimes men just don't know how to deal with their emotions, to understand their emotions.
Does our history in this country and upbringing of the individual play a role?
It certainly does. It certainly does. And if you think about it, this is where,
Because you mentioned earlier that we got a violent history.
Yes, and I think the problem, if you think in us celebrating the 20 years of democracy, one of the things we've got to put on the table and say we did not do very well in South Africa is to actually, we assume that if you have progressive legislation, a good constitution is then going to automatically translate to people in their private spaces. You've got to support people and say we've got to have different ways of being. Men were taught to be providers, to be protectors of family, to be breadwinners. Things are changing. So how do you respond to that when, in fact, your masculinity historically is linked to being a breadwinner and a provider, when, in fact, maybe you're unemployed? So what are you left with? And again, we have a situation where back in the day, police were seen to be the enemy of the people, the enemy of the people. So we were fighting the police. And now you have men who used to fight the police, being police themselves. They are armed. So you haven't had a proper transformation of the country to change us as men to not embrace violence. And it's a work in progress. It's not easy.
How do we change that narrative?
Well, I think I like what Mthetho is saying. One of the ways where we start changing is that to actually acknowledge as a country and not have this deliberate amnesia, the damage that apartheid has done. And it continues to do. It affects. But in the country, we suddenly want to forget how violent the system was and how people, the best way we knew to react, to respond to apartheid violence was violence itself. And one of the ways is how then do we begin, to deconstruct, to talk a different language, like what Mthetho is saying. And part of the work we do is to say, but there are other alternatives. It's possible to say, look, you and I are no more in love, and I'll walk away. And even acknowledge there are consequences. So, and when someone says, look, I may lose this, but I don't want you to lose your life. I may lose possessions, material possessions, but someone to say, but I, as a man, would actually find it maybe difficult, but I think I don't want to be violent. And as a result, I'll walk away, I'll walk out, mainly to say that I'll be a different man. But Elvis, we must acknowledge that even changing that narrative, that discourse, it can't be easy.
No, not at all.
Like what Mthetho is saying, our history, but also our teaching, the three of us sitting here, we have always been beneficiaries of what patriarchy is about. And even changing that mindset, where we will feel that I'm under attack. As Elvis, where's my manhood? I'm disrespected, I'm dishonored. All of those things are going to take time to say, but sometimes we've got to let go.
How do we identify an abusive person in an abusive relationship, and how can we stop this?
Unfortunately, the abuse, the spectrum is quite wide.
Yes.
We often talk about physical abuse. In relationships, there is emotional abuse, and again, we must emphasize, even especially with the work that Mbuyiselo and other organizations are doing, there's a lot of men who actually go through abuse, because what patriarchy teaches us is that we must silence our emotions, except anger and aggression. So you have a situation where men may not be happy, and they're in abusive spaces, whether at work or at home. They don't know how to articulate that. So part of what we've got to do is to actually say to men, we can help you to identify your emotions. So at the end of the day, it's not easy to identify those emotions, because part of what we've got to do, we've got to go where men are and actually say to them, you are emotional beings. There's a wide spectrum of emotions. And one of the things we've got to be able to do is to identify yourself when you become violent. As Mbuyiselo was saying, we've got to teach men alternatives, because all we know historically is to be violent.
Mbuyiselo, you have a number of campaigns as Sonke Gender Justice. Talk to us about that just briefly, because we haven't got much time.
Okay.
I've been told there's not much time, but talk to us about that, and how can it assist men?
Well, the one campaign, not in my name, where we proclaim as men that these things should not be done in the name of culture, in the name of religion. We have programs that focus work with traditional leaders. I just came back now from Lisikisiki with communities, working with a young man from Sonke, wonderful, powerful young man rather, Zitulele. But the point I'm making is that your one man can, your brothers for life, all of these programs are saying from Sonke that we don't have even to lambast men and take men as homogeneous, because men are different, but also to go, as Mthetho was saying, to go to where the men are, but even to listen and to hear. So the one man can, Brothers for Life, Fatherhood, all of these programs have one thing in common, Elvis, is to say that finally we're going to find a situation in this country where men would say, unapologetically, not in my name.
How did they get in touch with you? Where can they get more details?
Well, there are two ways. Our website, www.genderjustice.org.za. Yes. And then secondly, our telephone number, Johannesburg, it's 011-339-3589.
Just repeat again.
It's Johannesburg code 011-339.
Oh, 339.
3589.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here in the studio. There we have the clinical psychologist Mthetho Tshemese and Mbuyiselo Botha from Sonke Gender Justice joining us here in studio. Once again, thank you so much for your time.